Hello. Chuang said, "He is for himself. He uses his knowledge to perfect his mind, and he uses his mind to attain the universal mind. Why do people turn to him in such numbers?" Confucius said, "Men cannot see their reflection in running water, but only in still water. Only that which is still in itself can still the seekers of stillness. Of those things that receive life from the earth, the pine and the cypress trees alone stand out. They remain green summer and winter long. Of those that receive life from heaven, the wise King Shun alone was upright. Being fortunate, he was able to order his own life, and thus order the lives of others. Holding fast to one's own root is the foundation of courage. A single brave soldier may overcome 9 armies. If he can do this simply because he wants recognition, how much more can be done by one who rules heaven and earth, who embraces the 10,000 things, who dwells only for a time in the body, whose ears and eyes are just for forming images, who unifies all knowledge and never experiences death. He will soon, at a time of his own choosing, leave the dusty world and rise to another level. The world will naturally follow him. Why should he be concerned with the affairs of the world?" That was Chuang from The Inner Chapters. I'm going to read out a section from Gurdjieff now, where I think he describes how the internet and the modern media can damage our understanding. Gurdjieff says, "It is only thanks to this third force in the process of the blending of newly perceived impressions of every kind that there are crystallized in their being data for the cognizance and understanding proper to that being alone. And it is only during these processes of the crystallization of data for consciousness in the presence of three-brained beings that what is called Zernofookalnian friction takes place, required for the coating and perfecting of their higher parts. I must tell you here that only these newly perceived impressions which are crystallized in this order, and which appear in beings as a result of conscious mentation, are deposited in the localizations of beings with a series of data corresponding to former similar impressions already fixed in them. On the other hand, new impressions crystallized in the other order, that is, through the reason of knowing, settle in the being localizations at random, quite without any kind of, so to say, classification. And all these new impressions settle into this series of those former impressions which almost always have nothing in common with them. It is chiefly for this reason that in the presence of three-brained beings who have only the reason of knowing, everything newly learned is deposited and remains forever simply as information, without any cognizance of it by the whole of their being. Thus, new data of all kinds, perceived and fixed in this way in beings having the reason of knowing, have no value or usefulness for the welfare of their own subsequent existence. Moreover, the length of time it takes for fixed impressions of this kind to decrystallize depends on the quantity and the quality of the impulses engendered in a given being. As regards this latter fact ensuing from the degenerated functioning of the reason of your contemporary favourites, I recall by association one very rarely used saying of our respected teacher Mullah Nasruddin, which is expressed in the following words: "As soon as anything is needed, it seems that it is filthy and eaten by mice." All of what your favourites call knowledge, which has been acquired in their common presence in this way, is subjective and has absolutely nothing in common with objective knowledge. Well then, my boy, in order that the mentioned Zernofookalnian friction should be aroused in your being, and the crystallization of new perceptions should proceed from the reason of understanding, I learned among many other principles regarding the correct perception of new information always to adhere to one inflexible rule, that it should proceed in you in the entire absence of the being impulses of indignation, offense, and vexation, and so forth. If I go back to the beginning and skip through it a little bit, Gurdjieff explains that if we perform our being particle duty and live like men, then our perception becomes more real, it becomes more individual, and it is only the individual that can be real. The understanding proper to that being alone, that child of God, the eyes of God in that child who wished to see, that is the only real vision that there can be. So all this talk that we hear about evidence-based, meaning that you trust in authority, this can never result in objective knowledge. Do you see? It is only when a being, an individual, has chosen to see with his own eyes, has taken the risk to be himself and to say what he sees, and to mean what he says, and wear his heart on his sleeves. Only then does his vision of life move towards the objective. And Gurdjieff says that our impressions and the data that we collect should be deposited among similar impressions. In other words, we should work in a line. We should study something, and gradually we build things up of the same ilk. If we study architecture, then that knowledge is accrued inside us and is ordered. One thing is added to another, and a structure of knowledge is deposited inside of us. Now, how unlike that is the modern media and the internet, where so many things are blasted at us, and they're blasted, and the deposits that ensue inside us are of all sorts of random ideas that are deposited randomly, and they scramble our minds. And isn't that what we see in the world? A world descending into chaos, world leaders descending into unpredictable behavior, careering this way and that, making less and less sense, having no idea who they are, what is happening, and what to do. Mullah Nasruddin says that as soon as anything is needed, it seems that it is filthy and eaten by mice, because it's not being looked after. Now the internet and so on seems like a good fun game, and there are no consequences, but as soon as something is needed, you will realize that your knowledge is no longer any good. And at the end there, Gurdjieff talks about a perception without indignation, offense, and vexation. We should try to honor our eyes and not use them to stimulate the lesser angels of our nature. But of course the media is full of indignation, and the result of that is the crystallization of miseries and negativities, which, if it comes to it, we find are difficult to decrystallize. So there we are. That is the place that we live in. There is a war to be fought for anybody who wishes to do it. Many people who are very busy in their lives, busier than me for instance, they are unable, and they would not be able to even if they wanted to. They're just too caught up in the flow, and they have no stillness inside of them. But those who have ears to hear, well, maybe we can do something a little bit to help them, and certainly help us, and in some way, even if it's small, become a light in this world, to represent God at some level in this world. So may it be for our neighbour.